Thanks for checking out our podcast. If you are interested in learning more about writing, go check out our syndication page, seriouswriter.com, where you can find resources, articles, videos, topical classes, and the Brew and Ink podcast. Again, seriouswriter.com. We thank you for listening.
All right, and welcome back, everyone, to another Brew and Ink podcast. This is a Boo and Ink episode.
Nice.
We want to wish you all a happy Halloween this week. It's the end of October. It's really more of the excitement for me because after that, we got NaNoWriMo coming up in November.
NaNoWriMo. Are you doing something for NaNoWriMo?
I've got a goal to. I've filled out the calendar of what I need to hit by when, and we'll see how far we get through this year. I at least try and keep it on my calendar for each year and just keep it a part of a tradition and see how far I get each time. One of these years I'll hit again all the way through the 50,000 words. I've done it twice, but
do you have a specific project in mind that you want to work on?
I've been brainstorming.
Yeah, that's the hard part for me this year.
Right, it's starting something new. Yeah. I've got something in mind. Maybe book 3 of the sci-fi trilogy. At least get it into the first draft. Nice. I'm excited. We're going to have a kind of a Halloween episode.
We're going to have a Halloween episode. And this is what you do in case you don't go trick-or-treating. This is what you listen to. Because there are all these people, I don't know if they're going to go trick-or-treating or not this year. I think it's going to be kind of a down year for that.
Yeah, my neighborhood has been discussing whether or not, we're going to go around. I think for the most part, people are going to be handing out candies. There's some neighbors who have come up with a clever invention of making a tube from their house that goes down their steps into a bowl at the bottom.
Nice.
That's cute.
Yeah, I was like, that works.
Can we get like potato launchers kind of things and just launch candy at kids? Can we do that?
You know what? I think we have something there. Cotton candy, just cotton candy.
No, I'm thinking like really hard candy, like just shoot it at
Starburst.
kids.
They make marshmallow guns.
Tootsie Roll. They do make marshmallow
They're not
guns.
super accurate, but you can get them in range.
Yeah, there you go.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's just got to be over 6 feet or so. I mean, as long as you can get them.
Last time I used one, we were trying to hit targets at least 60 feet and several stories away.
Wow.
And it was getting that far.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
It wasn't going quite the distance we needed to hit the kissing couples underneath the oak tree where they weren't supposed to be, but enough to be a distraction.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an interesting segue into the topic. Just how many of the slasher flicks had the moral aspect to it, where the kids who were making out when they weren't supposed to be were the kids that got killed?
Right.
Yeah.
They were the ones that were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
She's shooting candy at them.
Yeah. I had to train my roommates to, tactical, to keep the lights out in the room. You can't giggle and slam the window closed when you make a shot. You have to be quiet and
right.
Line it up just so.
That's not very ninja-like.
No.
I wonder where that came from.
We did our best.
It's kind of like, kids don't understand that candy wrappers make noise and they're in the middle of the night and you're like, Who is in the kitchen?
Yep.
Eating something?
Smarties wrappers are the worst.
They're worst. So we're going to be talking about what makes a great scary movie.
Or a scary story.
Or a scary story in general.
Yes.
And we've got a couple examples each, I think.
Yeah.
Where we're going to be talking about good writing and good writing as it pertains to a specific genre. Like we've done science fiction and fantasy. We've done some of this before.
Yeah.
But this time we're going to be talking about a horror movie. What makes a good horror movie, scary story, book, whatever.
Right. And for me, my introduction really into reading creepy, scary, quote unquote, and maybe not quite considered good, but definitely classic in the sense that sold a lot, very popular, but was R.L. Stine and his series of Goosebumps, and then the older things that came out as well that he would put out. And so those, to me, were kind of where I got my start in reading the creepy stuff, but also like even like Grimm's tales. Those go way, way back.
Well, the originals
Yeah.
were very scary and creepy,
Yes.
and
Yes,
all that kind
you
of stuff.
you tend to hear those as a child as like a fairy tale, and then when you start delving deeper into it and seeing like the origins of some of these stories and the original versions
Oh,
of
the
them,
original versions, yeah.
you go, oh, they were literally trying to scare kids into not doing things.
Right, absolutely.
But obviously, the king of scary story writing would be Stephen King, and I was going to talk about it for a bit because I've experienced it in a couple different forms. I was first introduced when I was middle school, I think, to the TV series movie.
The classic.
Yeah, the made-for-TV series. And that definitely scared the wits out of me. But, it was something that I'd never seen a story told like that before, where if you're not familiar with it and you don't want spoilers, you may want to fast forward a little bit, but the story is told in two different time periods. It starts off with the kids and their experience with Pennywise and the clown and all that, and then after they think they've succeeded in ridding the town of it, they all come back for a reunion, I think 20 years later or something like that. Yeah. They're all grown up at this point. And it comes back. And they basically have to deal with it again after losing some people along the way. And I thought it was a very interesting storytelling to gap that in there with the characters and show kind of like, yeah, sometimes you may it kind of like opened the door for all these other scary movies or books where they do like overcome, and you're like, yeah, they did it, and then you read it and you're like, wait a minute, what if this is how it is like every time? Like, what if you think you've triumphed? And it made me go back and kind of think about all these other scary stories that I've read and be like, wait a minute, there's that possibility of coming back years later. So there was that. There's the book, and the book is definitely worth the read.
It's absolutely worth the read, except for the last 100 pages.
The end, the very end, which tends to get left out of the movie makes of it. And
yeah, the TV movie tried to do it.
Yeah.
And then the most recent duology, whatever you want to call it, it tried to do its own thing, and in my opinion, failed. I was pretty disappointed with the part two, especially.
I didn't see the part two yet.
Well, so my problem with the It movies has been the most recent ones.
Yeah,
they had a lot more getcha scares.
Okay.
And to me, and we'll get into this more, to me, that is not good writing.
Yeah.
Jump scares are cheap.
Yeah, jump scares are cheap.
And here's the thing is, you can't really do a jump scare in a story. Like in a book, you have to have a well-written, scary, thematic, intensity in there. And it doesn't.
Well, even if it's images, you can do images, but not like suddenly this happened or
you
whatever.
Turn around and something's in your face.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Like the jump scares in movies tend to be a fallback, kind of a cheap, and they don't really work on me anymore. I just went through, and not to get too far into the details of this, but I just got a VR system, and I watched It 2 kind of specially made thing for VR, and that's the whole thing was basically like to flash images like as close to your face as you could at moments, when you could tell a jump scare was coming.
Right.
And it just didn't. I'm sure it does it for most people, but it's startling more than it is scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said they had too many of those in that.
I just, to me, especially when I watched the first one in the theater, me and some friends
we're excited for
got
it,
together and we're like, come on, we got to go see this, because I read everything, as we talked about a couple years ago, the last time we did a Halloween episode. I probably said it, but I read everything by Stephen King for years. I mean, I read everything. And a lot of the people who were like him, in that sort of genre, I read everything, and so I was a huge fan of the book, except for the last 100 pages. But again, the rest of the book, because the book is 1,000 pages. Okay, right. The book is
it's a tome. Wow.
Yeah, it's 1,000 pages, and so 900 pages of genius writing isn't bad. I mean, he was drunk or high when he did the end or whatever happened. But so we went to go see the movie, and literally it got to the point where I was just expecting every time they rounded a corner, there's going to be it's cheap, and it starts to get predictable. And in a movie it can work selectively. It's like anything, you just got to do it selectively.
Yeah.
And because then it just becomes cheap, and you're just relying upon that rather than, like you're saying, character and good writing that you have to have in a book. Even just good creepy images, you can do that in a book. But anyway, so yeah, I've been really going back. I've been wanting to watch again Poltergeist.
Yes.
Because that, when I was a kid, was probably the first scary movie I really saw.
They're here.
Because it was rated PG.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know this, but Steven Spielberg did this movie.
Okay.
Like, this was a horror scary movie that Steven Spielberg did.
Right.
And it was such a great storyline. Like, it definitely went from kind of the creepy, it's kind of weird, maybe there are ghosts, and it just kept escalating. Like, to me, Poltergeist, I would like to watch it again and just kind of look at it from a writing perspective. Because when I was a kid, it scared the crap out of me.
Yep.
But at the same time, I loved it. But I would like to watch it again and see the escalation that they had. Like, I'm not going to give away the ending of the movie, but it literally is one of the best scary movies ever made.
Yeah.
Poltergeist is an amazing movie, but it's amazing because it's Spielberg, so he makes the stakes work. Mm-hmm. Right? It's about family.
Right.
There's a little girl that's missing.
Yeah.
Like he makes it about kind of
the characters
that are, and then of course the new characters he brings in are interesting, and of course the way he writes and does things is very interesting.
Yeah.
And he was at the top of his game when he did Poltergeist. Like, he had just done, Close Encounters, which I've watched recently, by the way. It has some creepy stuff too. But
it's pretty creepy.
But all that kind of stuff, like, he was at the top of his game, and so to me, Poltergeist is one that, looking back, I'm thinking, man, that is something that I think we could really learn from, because so many scary movies now are just about how to be as dark and disturbing as they possibly can be. And that, to me, is kind of like cussing a lot or putting a lot of sex in a movie. Like, that alone, I'm not saying...
It's pushing a line, but it's not being necessarily scary.
It's not adding things to the story.
It's not adding things to the story. It's shock value.
Yes, exactly.
And again, I'm not always against shock value, because there were shocking things in Poltergeist too, and disturbing things and creepy. But again, it's got to work with the story. And I just think to me, the ones I've watched recently, it's kind of like how far can we take disturbing? The Saw movies, and some of these movies that are try to get as disturbing as we possibly can. Where, just for me, the movies that put me on the edge of my seat are the movies that are like, oh my gosh, I have a kid, and that their kid is like, it's just
the ones that could be more relatable
to me. And that's just me, maybe, but that's me.
Katie, you have a book or a story?
So horror is not my genre. It's nothing that I was ever really interested in as a kid, and not something, like, I can't place any scary books or anything. So, like, I hate talking about movies all the time on a writing show, but here we are.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about it as we were talking, and the things that I found that make a really compelling, scary story are aspects of, like, inevitability and the unknown. So I watched Annihilation last year, and that one was really cool. It's a sci-fi flick where the main character is part of an exploratory team investigating this thing called the Shimmer. Aliens, and it's just, as they venture deeper into this thing, things just get weirder and weirder and more dangerous. And that aspect of the characters and thereby the audience doesn't know what is happening or why or what's going on in the next, the next part of the story, the next leg of the journey, that makes it a compelling, scary thing. So like it's got some gore and stuff that accentuate that fear of the unknown, but it isn't that isn't what makes the movie.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about Coraline, which is
Love Coraline.
Everybody probably knows Coraline, the stop motion movie based off of a Neil Gaiman book.
Not Neil Diamond.
Neil Gaiman.
Because he's different.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman. And that one's, and Jumanji also, another kids movie. There's that inevitability of that growing conflict with something that's revealed to be worse and bigger than previously thought. In Coraline, what seems sweet and lovely and what she wants turns to poison and then turns into her enemy that she has to delve deeper into to escape from. Sorry. And then Jumanji is similar. The kids have to finish the game that keeps getting progressively worse
and worse.
Well, and you're bringing up something that I thought of too, because when you were talking about the topic this afternoon, or we kind of were kicking it around a little bit. I think for me, it's kind of like a good magic system in fantasy.
Yeah.
There have to be rules in the scary movie. There have to be some sort of like limits that make sense.
Like, don't go to sleep because that's when Freddy gets you.
That, but also like not Friday the 13th, but Nightmare on Elm Street had rules. He could only get you when you were asleep. So there were rules. He could get you in the dreams, right? There were those sort of rules. And I think sometimes slasher flicks and scary movies, to me, go beyond.
They try to break anything that would make sense.
And Stephen King movies are actually, and books are really bad about this.
Yeah.
Because Stephen King will just throw something in there because he thinks it's creepy. And he thinks it's scary. Like, he'll have a dream and like, oh my gosh, that would be so scary. And so he just puts it in and he justifies it somehow. But to me, it doesn't make it as scary if there aren't any rules. Like, to me, one of Stephen King's scariest books was Misery. Because it was just about a crazy lady who had this author that she loved and figured out that in his last book he killed off the main character that she loved.
Yep.
And so she's, got him captured and he's injured, and like all of the stuff that happens in that book are like, oh my gosh,
really
that could really happen. But even if it's like Nightmare on Elm Street or something like that, where there has to be, to me, some sort of rules, like Jumanji, like we're going to roll the dice and something's going to happen. Like there were rules that allowed it to escalate, but not be stupid. Not, I don't know. Maybe stupid is not the right word, but just something that seems to come out of nowhere, and they just justify it. You know, like my kids say, because story happens. I mean, like that's what my kids say when we're watching a movie and something happens, and they go, "Story happens." Like there's no reason for that to happen.
Right.
It pulling things out like that would be the equivalent of a negative Deus Ex Machina, monster out of the machine. Rather than a save.
Yeah, good.
Why did this show up?
Because
it's cool, I guess.
Yeah.
And that doesn't lend anything to a good story. It's fear fan service.
Yeah. Well, and to me, it makes the unbelievable believable when there are rules.
Yeah.
Right? That's why magic systems have become what they've become in fantasy recently in the last 10, 20 years. Is because it used to be cool that Gandalf could seem to do whatever he needed to do in the moment that he needed to do it.
Right.
And then couldn't do things when he couldn't shouldn't be, it was all based on story. It wasn't based on any real rules that Tolkien had for what magicians could do or wizards could do.
Right.
And so, especially as our culture has become more interested in the scientific and in things making sense to some degree. I mean, at least make it up,
Yeah.
The Star Trek, they at least make up some technology and give it rules that you can then bend and maybe break, but at least then you're bending and that makes it more believable to me. And that to me makes it scarier. That to me actually makes it more frightening when you bring up a situation and there's actually rules to it. And then I can think, what would I do in that situation? Then I can relate to it rather than, like you're saying, the monster in the machine, where it's kind of like almost every Walking Dead episode.
Right.
There's zombies for no reason or just show up.
Yeah.
And I'm like...
Yeah.
You can almost time it. You're like, okay, we're about 20 minutes into the episode. It's time for a lot of zombies to show up.
The characters are starting to have a real moment. The zombies are going to show up.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
When the characters are having a real conversation and they didn't want to... It's kind of like the Spanish Inquisition in Monty Python, where like they didn't know how to end a skit. They would just they would just throw something stupid in.
Yeah.
That's what the Walking Dead writers would do, is they didn't really know how to end a conversation between two characters. They would have to like, zombies.
Yeah.
So we never got to finish that conversation.
I've got another kind of a kids appropriate scary movie, and I didn't get to finish this recently, so I don't have a full recollection of sort of how the whole movie plays out, but I started watching with my son, the 7-year-old, Flight of the Navigator. And we only got so far because he was kind of like, what's going on? It was freaking him out. But essentially what I would say makes this sort of scary to begin with, and then it sort of gets more into that like adventure kind of 1980s sort of thing. But he's just running through the woods, and then he falls off this ravine and hits the ground, and the next thing you know, he's trying to go back to find his family and his house, and no one's there, no one knows who he is, people are in his house, and it's really kind of this scary thematic kind of scene, and especially with watching it with like a 7-year-old, and he's trying to figure it out, and eventually comes out like, you've been gone for, I think it was 8 years or 9 years. Basically, he was like 12, I think, when he disappeared, and he was supposed to be 20 when they found him again, and his parents are older, and this kid's like going through this this trauma of like, why are my parents looking different, why are they so old, and then as he's trying to do this, they leave him at the hospital because the doctors want to run tests on him. So now he's, not only did he have to go through the crisis of not knowing where his family is, but he finds it, but then it's pulled away and he has to stay there overnight. And then he starts having these kind of nightmares about some entity that he's like, it's hurt, it's crying out for me. And eventually it comes around that he had contact. He'd been abducted by an alien and had contact with these aliens, and now he's the only one that can communicate back and forth, and so it becomes that, like, how do we now save the alien type movie? But it starts off as this very creepy kids-level alien abduction movie.
Yeah, you're right. It does have those elements in it.
Yeah.
And one other thing about Poltergeist, and I could use a lot of movies, but I'm just going to try to focus on one, is another thing that makes a scary movie, a good movie or story, is what makes all stories good, is that the characters change and learn something.
Yeah.
The characters have to change and learn something. They have to rise to the occasion. They have to get to the end, and there's some sort of moral to the story. That's why Something Wicked This Way Comes is so great. That's why even Misery had that aspect to it, that the characters had to learn something. And because that's what makes a great story. You just have to put it in the context of whatever the genre is that you're doing.
Yeah.
And because if you just get to the end and it's just survival, it might be a harrowing couple hours or whatever, a few hours where you're reading the book, but it's just not, it doesn't affect you as much. Does it stick with you the same as if you have to, the characters really had to learn, like The Sixth Sense or something like that, where even though there's this twist at the end and yada yada yada, there was some kind of scary parts in it, but really there was a lot of character building that happened with the Bruce Willis character and the kid, and I see dead people and all this stuff. It was a kind of a weird situation, but I just think that's another part of it, is that it just has to be a good story too, and the characters have to learn something. They have to have something to overcome, whatever it is.
Yeah, I feel like in the late '80s, early '90s, there was a slew of those kind of slasher films that came out where you had like just the one bad guy, like the one adversary sort of thing. You know, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, like just one thing.
Hellraiser.
Yeah, Hellraiser.
What was his name?
Pinhead.
Pinhead, that's what it was.
Lawnmower Man, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, Lawnmower Man wasn't as much.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as much a slasher flick, but it was that too.
Yeah.
The names on some of these guys are super dumb.
Yeah.
Pinhead.
Did you never see it?
I have no idea what this is.
He had nails coming out of his head.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
I think one that still stands the test of time, and it's one of those that's a sci-fi / kind of scary movie, is Aliens.
Oh.
And I
the
like
first Alien.
The first one, but I like the second one.
Well, the second one's more an adventure, sci-fi adventure.
But the first one.
The first one is a slasher flick in space. It's amazing.
In space, and they really do just kind of focus on one creature. Like they don't try and overthrow it with like a horde of them, like they do in the newer ones. You know, there's so many of them that it's just like you get overrun. But so you're, and I feel like they do a pretty good job of keeping you on the edge, but also establishing sort of some rules. Like Predator is another one where he's like, if it bleeds, we can kill it or whatever. You know, like you sort of, the characters learn along the way, like, okay, this thing isn't just some super overpowered creature. It has limits. It has rules. If we can get it within this situation, we could kill it, sort of thing. And I like those types of movies where, you know, it's not just about the blood and the guts and the people dying, but it's about learning about what you're up against and then figuring out how to overcome it within the context and within the rules.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we would sit around with flashlights and tell each other scary stories.
Yeah.
Like, we would have overnight parties. We would have, sleepovers. We would sit around with my cousins in the basement of my grandma's house, and we would see who could come up with the best scary story. I mean, I don't know if that happens anymore. I don't know if people do that anymore.
We did that with our cousins too. When I ask Liam if he wants to tell stories before going to bed, he usually opts for a scary story.
Right.
And so he'll have me go first, and I'll say something. And this is definitely, he did this more when he was younger, but then he would basically copy beat by beat what I had just told, but then put his own characters on it.
That's really cool.
And so I would start asking him very leading questions along the way, like, okay, okay, what does your character want? Like, what is his goal? Or things like that. And I think that's a great way, like when you're just sitting there around the campfire or with, in the basement with your friends or cousins and things like that. Like, I had to limit Liam to telling him, we can't just kill people. Like, you can't just kill off characters in your story. Like, let's see if we can tell a scary story without death involved.
Wait.
Yeah.
Are you saying I can't kill people in my stories? Because I
you
do
can.
that a lot.
You can. You're old enough. But yeah, but you can come up with scary stuff without having,
Oh, yeah. Man, so 2 movies that have scared me, or not even movies. One was a book. The other one was a movie. And I'm not going to be able to remember the name of the movie. But there was a book called The Road.
Oh, yes.
And I couldn't put that book down. The writing is genius. Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
The writing is borderline genius because, like, no names, just the man and the boy. But you figure out it's a dad and a son.
Yeah.
And he's just trying to keep this kid alive, and they're like post-apocalyptic kind of thing. post-nuclear war. They're trying to find some food, and he's, people are just, killing each other to try to stay alive and eat. And it's so much of it's disturbing, but at the same time, like, I couldn't put this book down. I literally read this book in one night. Like, I started reading it at probably like 8 o'clock, and I could not, like, it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I finished the book. It wasn't really that long of a book, but I was just like, holy crap. Like, but I had a son. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was one of those things where it's like,
what would I do?
Like, oh my God. And the other one was a movie, and it had Ewan McGregor in it. And it was about the
saving the baby.
It was a tsunami.
Oh, okay,
there was a tsunami, and it was about the tsunami that had hit Sri Lanka or whatever a few years ago.
The Impossible.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's.
And they had two. He and his wife are on vacation. They're like European or whatever, and they're on vacation, and the tsunami hits this resort, and his wife and one kid, they get separated, and he gets separated from his family.
Yeah.
And the whole movie is them trying to make it back together. That movie, it's not even a scary movie. I was terrified. I was literally like, because I knew it was a true story, number one. And number two, I'm like, oh my God, what would I do if my wife and my kids and the wife had like a pretty major injury that she was trying to like not tell her kids about because she didn't want them to freak out.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was so real. It was terrified me. It literally terrified me.
Yeah.
But it was, see, that's the kind of stuff to me now, especially.
Yeah.
And I used to be able to watch all kind of, and I still can. I mean, like slasher flicks or whatever.
Yeah.
Michael Myers and Halloween.
Yeah.
To me was the best of those.
Yeah.
They were all fun, but that was the best because it was the creepiest of like, just who he was, and it was her brother, and it just was like crazy and all that kind of stuff. But like the stuff like that, like The Road, and The Road does have some disturbing, scary, creepy parts to it. But again, like stuff like that to me, and some of the stuff that M. Night does, and some of the stuff in that vein of just being creepy and intense. But to me, it has to be about relationships and story. Like, to me, if it's just a monster coming to try to get people, it can be fun, but it's not as engaging. And I think that's true for pretty much everybody, I would say.
I feel like at some point, at some age, those lose their magic. The kind of, off the wall, unexplainable, magical serial killer. Like, eventually you just go, okay, this doesn't scare me anymore. And do I really want to invest my time in watching another one?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So I have a little treat for you guys. It's a quick flash fiction scary story. And then after that, we'll have some recommendations of things to watch or read. Flash fiction, The Nature of Things. Carter's old beat-up Ford pickup was covered in a layer of dust and vines as he wound round the backcountry roads. The wheels needed rotating and the suspension was shot. He could feel every rock and dip in the path barely wide enough to be called a 2-lane road. But he knew there'd be no one else out here at this time of night, and he needed medical attention fast. He traveled this path from his family's cabin every year as a child. This year he had decided to take this trip on his own. He'd grown distance from his parents since the divorce and hadn't wanted any extra drama around, just him and his dog Rex. However, the drama had followed him out into the woods as well. The trip had started off fine. The old house had been a little run down and overgrown, but Carter didn't mind the manual labor of cutting back all the vines and thorns that had creeped in around the property and up the side of the cabin. He had most of it removed and in the fire by sundown, and he and Rex enjoyed a well-earned meal and some time by the fire. It was the next morning that Carter realized he had been careless when he saw the angry red rash of a poison ivy blister running up his calf. And when he started having trouble breathing, he realized he had made the mistake of throwing some in the fire as well. Rex also seemed to be wheezing a bit, whining like something was bothering him. They stayed mostly indoors that day. Carter made a poultice out of some baking soda and aloe to help the weeping wounds heal. By mid-afternoon, though, the rash had engulfed his shin and was running up his thigh, and Rex hadn't moved from his spot all day. That settled it. They needed to get out and get some medical attention. But as Carter struggled to carry Rex to the truck, he saw that there were vines now grown back over where he had cleared yesterday. Carefully inspecting the vines which had grown up around his truck, he realized these were no ordinary plants. They had the look of English ivy, the way they spread out over the ground, but the leaves were that of poison ivy. No wonder he had not recognized it before. This was not a natural plant. When he went to open the truck door, one of the vines that had grown up over the roof of the truck released itself and landed on his arm, slowly began wrapping around his wrist. When he jerked back his arm, freeing himself from the plant, Rex slipped out of his grip and landed in a thick patch of the ivy. Rex didn't even let out a whimper from the impact, as he was so taxed for air, and when the vine snatched around his waist, he only had enough energy to kick his legs once before he was dragged off, disappearing into the underbrush. Carter knew there was nothing he could do at that point. He jumped into the truck and took off into the night. He was about an hour's drive down the old dirt road now. His driving leg throbbed and itched from the rash, and his wrist was now beginning to swell up, puffy and red. He knew the junction to the Highway 5 was just up ahead. The paved road would allow for a quicker travel, and the hospital was not too far from there. Then there was a swishing sound, like leaves being dragged across the pavement. Carter checked his rear view, pus from his right wrist rolling down his arm as he adjusted the mirror. The wound had popped, leaving gaping holes deep into the tissue. In the rear view, he saw a pile of the poison vines festering in the bed of his truck, spilling out over the tailgate and trailing behind him. Then, from above him, vines came rolling down over the windshield. Carter tried the wipers. They batted the first outstretched tendrils away, but then soon were tangled up in a thicker overgrowth. Carter's breath came in short, labored breaths as he tried not to panic from the lack of visibility. There was the highway. He skidded across 2 lanes as he hit a hard right onto Highway 5. He could not move his right foot from off the gas that fast even if he'd wanted to. It was so numb from the itching and the pain. He pressed the gas harder, and a large patch of the vine slid off the windshield. Carter whooped in victory. A sign for the nearest hospital read 1 mile ahead. The next exit. He just needed to make it 1 more mile. "All right, you freak of nature, you took over my house. You killed my dog, but you ain't getting me," Carter yelled at the sickly green leaves of 3 covered in blue veins and vines full of prickles. In response, the vines swung over the driver's side door and pressed in tight to the window. The drag was too much on this side, and the remaining patch of ivy from the windshield flew off into the night. But Carter was still in real bad shape. The red, oozing wound was all the way up his right leg, and now his crotch was beginning to itch. The lights of the Blue Ridge County Hospital came into view, and Carter barreled into the parking lot and right up into the covered drop-off area, slammed the car in park, and shoved his door open, leaping for the first step. Attendants inside came rushing to see what all the commotion was about, and Carter called out to them. "Some sort of mutated poison ivy," he gasped for air. "You gotta help me," gasped. "I can't breathe. Can barely stand." The attendants came rushing and stopped short of Carter, looking at something behind him. Before he could turn around, vines as strong as pythons wrapped around his waist, yanking him off the hospital steps and into the bed of his old, beat-up Ford truck. By morning, the Blue Ridge County Hospital was lost in the dense tangle of pulsing, writhing pile of ivy, its tendrils slowly creeping out into the world, ready to bring everything back under the rule of the wild. back to the nature of things long past. So that was my flash fiction. Now
That was nice.
I hadn't done a flash fiction in a while, and we were just talking about setting up the scientific or the rules of something.
Yeah.
And I had started off with a very sort of scientific explanation approach to this. I was like, you know what, flash fiction, trying to do this under 1,000 words, like you don't have time for that in a flash fiction. You just got to get into the action of it.
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of pulled from some real life motivation.
You have some struggles in your own life?
I did, yes. I was attacked by poison ivy myself, and I was just like, through the whole healing process, I was just baffled by like the body's ability to rebound from these things, but also B, like the effects that just a plant could have on our skin. Like I literally had holes in my arm that were layers deep, like into the skin, just from touching something, not from like my scratching or anything. Like these were just festering wounds. But yeah, so that was that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Happy Halloween.
I mean, you put the word crotch in your story. So,
I did, yeah.
I mean, that's always
Yes.
a sign that's it's going to be scary.
That I did not have. It was on my arm, so that was not real life.
Your crotch was on your arm?
No, my
Oh.
I'm sure at some point. my poison ivy infection was.
That's talent. You could take that on the road.
Actually, no. I was very confused because I did get the infection. The poison ivy started in my armpit, and I was like, "How did it get there?" That's why I didn't suspect it as some sort of poison ivy. I was like, "Oh, my armpit really itches. What's up with this?" And then it like spread like crazy. I've never had a poison ivy infection like that before. I've always just had like a little dot, and then it went away. But we've got some scary story movie recommendations, shows for you guys. I've got two. One is on Netflix.
Nice.
The Haunting of Bly Manor. I'm only a couple episodes into it, but so far it's good. They definitely are going off some jump scare stuff, but it's not anything like the Haunting of Hill House. At this point, it's much more of a story that's being told about these two children who lost their parents, and then a year later they lost their nanny that was basically helping them out. The lady took her own life, and it goes from there. Some thematic, scary type things, definitely some jump scares, but more of a psychological sort of, or at least so far. I'm only a couple episodes in, but I would recommend that. And then on Amazon Prime, there's a show called Paranormal 911, and these are based off of real life events, real life 911 emergency responder calls. So security guards that are, having to go investigate in schools after alarms are triggered in the middle of the night, and then they're instead running into very odd and paranormal type situations.
Nice.
Ghosts and voices and like one was about a school that went through a hurricane years ago, and when the security guard was there, all of a sudden one of the rooms he was in winds just started blowing the whole room around. The windows were open and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, these are like real life type stories, and you don't know, I mean, how much do they elaborate and expound, but whenever something is like based on true events, I'm always like, that's a little extra scary there. So those are my two recommendations.
Nice.
Kind of on that, your mileage may vary. I've been enjoying some green text YouTube channels. So they get stories from 4chan's paranormal, supernatural chat and just
cool.
tell that. And so the premise with it is that these are all true stories. Some of them clearly aren't, but others are like, maybe, just maybe. So, and the one channel that I listen to most is Chass, Chass. He's pretty good. And then I've been enjoying the Magnus Archives. It's a podcast. Catch it wherever you get your podcasts. That's a long form narrative, story within a story, about an archivist whose job is to catalog and record paranormal, supernatural stories. And then through bits of recording within the podcast, you realize, there's actually paranormal stuff that's happening to the archivist and the other people around him. And it becomes its own thing. It's pretty fun. Leans into the gore a little bit in places, a lot of psychological horror, but pretty cool.
What was the name of that one?
The Magnus Archives. Mm-hmm. And I think that one's going to be wrapping up soon. I haven't caught up with episodes recently, but fun stuff. I don't know if it counts so much as horror, but just like an interesting, a little bit scary, is an anthology collected by Neil Gaiman called Unnatural Creatures. Has some stories by Diana Wynne Jones and Peter S. Beagle, and a lot of really cool short fiction there. And then last is my perennial favorite, Sasquatch Chronicles.
Yes, they came back. They were gone for about like a year.
Yeah, I've talked about this one before, but this one is based on true stories. This guy who runs the podcast, Wes, just has people come on who have had encounters with Sasquatch or other supernatural creatures. And whether you believe in that or not, some of these encounters are pretty gripping.
Yeah.
So, fun stuff.
I've become a fan. I listen to that quite frequently. I've also watched the Survivor Man
Les
season.
Stroud
Les
is
Stroud.
really good.
He had one season that he devoted to trying to find the
And
Sasquatch.
he had some encounters.
Which is why he did it, because he was just out shooting Survivor Man, and he kept having these very weird encounters, and he's like, the only way that I can really describe these things would fall into the line of Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And so then he was like, you know what, I'm going to take a whole season and just search out all these areas that are high trafficked kind of Sasquatch areas. And so that was a fun season to watch.
Nice.
Yeah.
As far as recommendations, I mean, I think the main one would be to go with what I was talking about earlier with Poltergeist. One book that I think is not one of Stephen King's most famous, but I think is one of his best, is Needful Things. Needful Things is an amazing story, and it's an amazing book. And they did make a movie, but just like with most of Stephen King's movies, it's not good. But Needful Things is an amazing book, and it has those elements I was talking about earlier, where it's more character based, it's more a little scary, but it's more just dark and creepy, but preying on people's weaknesses and preying on their lusts and preying on those sort of things.
Yeah.
It's really, really well done. One of my favorites when I was a kid was a Disney scary movie called The Watcher in the Woods, which I think was a book too.
Oh, interesting.
But Disney made a scary movie around 1980, and I have looked for it recently, and it is on no streaming service. You can't even get it on Amazon, buy it.
It's not even on Disney Plus?
It's not on Disney Plus.
Wow.
My friends, there are things called torrents. It's probably there.
It's probably there. I mean, I'm sure you can buy the DVD or something like that. I don't even know if it's on DVD, but it was again one of those things when I was a kid, because it came out when I was a kid, right? And it was Disney, so I was allowed to watch it because it was PG or whatever. But it was super creepy and intense, and yet it wasn't gory, right? Because it was PG. So Needful Things, the book. There were a few years there when Stephen King started to sober up that he actually wrote some amazing books. He wrote books that it wasn't just talent. Like it was talent with like some real
Some
experience and thought behind it. Needful Things was one of those. Misery was in that. It was all in that same sort of time period where the characters were. His characters are always good, which is what makes people like his stuff. But you know, the stories were a little more cohesive and not gimmicky. You know, like Pet Sematary and some of these things are kind of gimmicky in my opinion. Good, but like Needful Things, and then of course, like I said, Poltergeist, The Watcher in the Woods, and some of the classics, man. And I'm gonna have to look for them on Disney Plus and see if like The Headless Horseman. And some of this stuff that was, you know, they used to play every Halloween. You know? You remember? I don't know if you remember, but like we would watch them.
Yeah.
We'd either go trick or treating and then come home and watch them, or whatever.
We already watched through all the Halloween Town movies from Disney.
Yeah.
That was my wife's, like, every year on Disney they would watch that, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think those would be my recommendations for this year. But I mean, I like so many different kind of horror and psychological stuff.
Yeah.
We were talking about Split earlier for M. Night. I thought that one was really...
That was done well.
That was really done well. And what's his name? James McAvoy, or whatever his name.
He did a great job acting.
Oh my gosh, his acting in that is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's so good. So I just think there's some really quality stuff out there that just happens to be scary. Like they happen to be scary movies, but those would be my recommendations.
I have one last recommendation to podcast. It's called Creepy, and they do the 31 Days of Horror in October. So horror, yeah. So if you want to binge some short stories, scary horror stories on a podcast form, Creepy has that, and you know they get all of theirs from, you know, the creepypasta stuff that you find on the internet. So some of the stories are
There's
hit or miss.
creepypasta?
Yeah, it's a genre, a subset. I don't know, how would you describe it?
Creepypastas are
supposedly true.
Yeah, where the green text is like, it's kind of brief and just not well written. This is stuff that's written to be believed that it's true.
Okay.
And like some of them are really involved and really good story writing. They've got a strong, I think they're typically done as a first person POV.
Yeah.
So is this guy like actually real or not? And you know, the more knowledgeable you sound, the weirder it is. But creepypastas are fake stories made to sound true.
I learn something new every day.
So we hope you guys enjoy your Halloween. And
please do. Do we have a P.O. box where people can mail any extra Reese's peanut butter cups that they might have? Because I'll eat them.
Yeah, we will set one up.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll put it on the Facebook page.
Yeah. So have a spooktacular Halloween and raise a glass to inspiration. And stay inspired, guys.
That they had like part DNA from aliens from way back. Uh-oh. What's the sound? What's going on? What's wrong?
Still hear something.
I mean, this door's open.
There is one in there.
Red light is still on.
We good to go?
We're good to go.
Oh, good.
So, that's the Halloween episode?
Yeah.